Hello everyone, thanks for joining. This is Marco with a substitute for the live stream for which I had technical difficulties earlier. My apologies to everyone that tried to join. I promise I will have it figured out for next time. So for today, my intent is to demonstrate some of the use cases for the VeADIR on the beta platform. Specifically 3 different scenarios we're going to go through. Starting actually at the bottom, I'm going to take everyone through the VE exposure. I've called this the easy button in previous videos. This is a case where you would have VeRI and Ethereum and you want to open an exposure. And then I'll go through the 2 scenarios with economic rent as both the rentee and the renter. In each case, they have basically half of what's needed to open an exposure. They either have Veritaseum or Ethereum, and to open an exposure, you need both. So let's go ahead and get started. This is the latest version of the beta platform. Came out, I believe, 2 days ago. There's some enhancements in here over previous versions. I'll try and point those out as we go through the scenarios. So let's take one quick peek back over here again at the VE exposure scenario. Now this is a scenario where the user would own both VeRI and Ethereum. And since this is implemented as economic rent, the VeRI will be consumed as a fee in this process. If you're interested in scenarios that do not consume the VeRI, we will cover that off when contract rent comes live in the beta, hopefully in the next few weeks. Under this scenario, the user would receive 100% of the profit or loss paid out to them in Ethereum. And for this scenario, there is no dependency on another party to open an exposure. So let's go ahead and do this first, and then we'll double back and tackle off the economic rent scenarios. So this is the summary screen of the VeADIR. If we come over here to the menu, these 3 bars open up the menu. We're interested in the exposure beta. Now this is a similar layout as the past betas. The enhancements here, which I'll go ahead and point out now, have to do with the notifications. They've enhanced the notifications now, and instead of a pop-up, they've utilized the pane to the right. And there's 2 components now to the notifications. The timeline, which you'll see for an exposure that I opened yesterday, was opened a day ago and collected a day ago. And these pop-outs again take you to the Etherscan page so that you can look at the blockchain transaction directly. There's also an info tab. We were on the timeline, so this will add on here subsequent events. So when it closes and when it settles, those events will show on this timeline. Under the info tab, just gives some general information about the exposure, the currency that it was opened in, the value, the fee in terms of VeRI that I paid, the starting date of the exposure, and the ending date. So this particular exposure you'll see is 30 days long. And so one other enhancement over the previous beta is they've brought back an ROI feature per exposure. I'm not sure how this is really going to function, since this is really the first yesterday and today is the first time that I've really seen this. I would assume each subsequent exposure we will get an ROI update update for each of these as we go. We will see. So let's go ahead, and to open a new exposure, it's really easy. You simply click the plus button, and you'll see this new pane replace the other pane, and this is the open exposure pane. You'll see the ratio right now, which is 1 vary to 100 eth. Beta limit for the latest version has increased up to 0.05 vary now, and with the 1 to 100 ratio, that equates to 5 ether cap. I'm going to go ahead and use 0.01 vary, which again equates to 1 ether just for this test. Certainly after we go live, I'll be using larger amounts and longer durations, but for now, for testing, I've just been using 1. Duration, let's go with 30 days, and that's it. You just simply fill in the amount of vary. That tells you right here the exposure value in Ethereum. You must have the appropriate amounts preloaded already onto your wallet account. If you do not, the transaction will not go through. So we can go ahead and hit the big Veritaseum colored submit button, easy button here. We can see that brings up the MetaMask notification for the transaction. And before we go there, I just want to quickly point out something. The Veritaseum developers recently did a revision on their gas handling. I want to commend them for that. They've updated the gas functionality, and they go out and they do a real-time look at the blockchain of how busy it is, and they dial in their gas price accordingly. We can get an approximation of that from the ethgasstation.info site, and as we see here, the safe and low recommended gas prices from ethgasstation are sitting at 1, so that is right on with the 1 gwei they've got here. I'm just, for purposes of this demo, I'm going to go ahead and kick it up to 2, just so we'll get a little bit faster execution. So as I submit that MetaMask notification, you'll see that down at the bottom it went away, but it gave me the transaction notification where we could have opened the blockchain, the Etherscan page viewing the blockchain transaction. You'll also see a grayed out row up here with my 1 Ethereum, 0.1 vary, and 30-day duration on this particular exposure. So that's going under out, trying to get confirmed on the blockchain right now. As soon as it does, this will update into an open status. You'll see over to the right in the notification pane, we see the opening here. We could actually go out and look at the blockchain transaction here. I'm going to go ahead and open that on my other screen just so my address and whatnot will stay private. Okay, so we see now the status has changed to open, and or it's working on opening it, and status is collected. If we go ahead and go back to the summary page, what we'll see is something similar to these trades here, which were actually mined from yesterday. These are a bucket of exposure I opened yesterday. You'll see that I used the 1 Ethereum and it populated it with the tokens, which we will get to in just a few minutes. I have noticed that the latest trades panel up here in this beta does have some delays. Yesterday it was about a half-hour delayed, so I did go ahead and report that to Messiah. Hopefully they'll get that fixed up so that the latest trades update real time as in the previous version. Okay, so that's it, really. If we go back to that exposure page, we'll see here's the previous one I had open that we were just looking at on the transactions. This one's been collected. It was a little over a day ago, and current ROI, no surprise, it's minus 2.5%. That's one thing where we have noticed the shorter durations with the volatility of the underlying assets. It's a little tougher to gain a good ROI in a short time. Therefore, that's one of the reasons that I'm going out to the maximum 30-day limit out here on the durations. And again, once it goes live, I'll extend that out even further. So that's really it. If we wanted to go, again, look at the information, the notifications on that, you'll same as before, exposure collected, except now it opens in this pane over here, and it does give you this updated status, sort of a highlight right here. So that's it for exposure. That's really why I call that the easy button. It's very simple. You can see. However, you do need both Veritaseum and Ethereum. And with the 1:100 ratio, to open sizable exposures, you will of course need sizable quantities of Ethereum. So just something to keep in mind there. Okay, so let's go ahead now and move on to economic rent. Now, economic rent is one type of rent that the Veritaseum team is building into the platform. There will also be contract rent coming later. They are two unique methods of implementing rent within the platform. Economic rent in this case we're going to take us through does utilize the Veritaseum, is consumed as a fee. So that's the one of the primary distinctions with this particular approach of rent. However, concept is you would make enough profit in your returns that you would be able to replace your vary and still have profit left over. So we will see how that works as we start getting more experience and closed out exposures. We'll start being able to compile some stats and see how that works out. So let's take a look first at the renter use case. Again, this is in the VE rent platform or component of the platform. This scenario is for a user who owns only Ethereum, no Veritaseum. Veritaseum is expected to become scarcer and scarcer and accordingly more expensive as time goes on. And it's anticipated, Reggie and the Veritaseum team has anticipated that not everyone will have Veri to be able to access the platform. And as it is a utility token, that is a mandatory element to be able to interact with the platform and open exposures. Thus, for economic rent, he's wisely designed this so that we can basically split the exposure into two halves, the Veri half and the Ethereum half. And so for the person that's the renter, you own a bunch of Ethereum and perhaps you're not interested in owning Veri, or you're unable or unwilling to obtain it. So this scenario is designed for you. The price of the exposure is going to be a percent of the profit at the end. We'll look at that more in depth in a few minutes. The renter is responsible for the loss. So if a loss does ensue, if the underlying digital assets have a loss over the period of the duration, the renter and not the rentee will be responsible for that loss. The Ethereum that's paid back to the renter at the end of the at the settlement of the exposure will have the loss deducted or the profit added in. As I indicated within the two halves here, you are, as a renter, dependent on a rentee to open an exposure. You need both halves of the equation to get the exposure open. So let's go ahead and go back to the platform now. And while I was talking, we'll see that the latest exposure has collected now. It's got no ROI yet. It's really just started there. If we take a quick peek back at the summary screen, we'll see the latest trades have not yet updated, and so there is still a bit of a lag updated there. We do see the bell notification has come on that indicates there's some sort of notification. If I click that, we'll see, oh, it's because my exposure was collected. So if I click that, it actually just takes me right back directly to the particular exposure that notification was for. So we're interested now in the VE rent capability, and as I've explained in previous videos, there's two halves to this. There's offering VeRiTokens, so this would equate actually to the rentee because they've got Veritaseum. However, we're going through the renter scenario, Ethereum only, and so in that case we need to get Veritaseum tokens prior to opening our exposure. Now there is a couple different ways of doing this, as in the entire platform. There's a lot of ways to take care of particular functions. In this case, you could, the simplest way would be to just browse through the list of offers here already, and if one of them suits you, you can go ahead and take that offer and open your exposure with it. We've got one on here, 30%. Obviously this is, it's a 30-day exposure. That's an awful steep percentage price, but that's mine. So I can actually, if I want, I can go ahead and take that. You'll see here that if no one takes it within a little less than 3 days, it is going to expire. It is for a Veritaseum fee of 0.01, which associates with the 1 Ethereum value of that associated exposure. 30% price means that if I want to accept this offer to gain the exposure, I will have to pay the owner of that Veritaseum 30% of the profit, if any, at the end, at the closing and settlement of that exposure. So 30 days from now, the person on the other side of this trade would see 30% of the profit, and I would keep the remaining 70%. This one is actually mine, so I'm just going to go ahead and take that and show how that process works. Excuse me. So to do that, you simply take the shopping cart here, click it, and accept it. You do need to read the confirmation information here before you move ahead. I have read that, so I will go ahead and continue. Excuse me. Once again, we see the MetaMask transaction confirmation window pop up. You'll see to the left my offer grayed out, sitting here waiting for the transaction to be confirmed. So I will go ahead and submit this. Actually, before I do that, let me slide this down a little more. Look over here. We can see the status that now the VeADIR is actually waiting for this. Everything is waiting for this MetaMask confirmation to occur, and then control will transfer back to the VeADIR, and it will go ahead and continue with its activities. So let me hit submit on that, and we see the transaction created down here, where we could go look at that on the blockchain, and we see again my offers in grayed out here. Boom. Now you see that that just disappeared and it came over here. That means the transaction was just confirmed. You'll see the renter added an offer here under the information that was accepted up here. The offer has now turned into an open exposure and shifted over here into my opened exposures tab. You'll see that it has a value of 1 Ethereum, a price of 30%. So far the ROI on that's 0, which is to be expected. And it just now has started the countdown on working. So that's it. That's the easiest way to open an exposure as a renter, getting VeRI tokens, just taking an existing offer. The alternative to that is if you weren't satisfied with any of the offers, if 30% as the only 30-day duration that was there is too steep, I agree, that seems like an awful steep price, but depends on how badly the other person wants the exposure, I suppose. The market will determine what these prices in terms of percentage rates will be. Everyone's anxiously waiting to kind of see what the market will bear on both sides. So let's go ahead and just click the plus up here. Before I go further, I want to point out some things. I will note that this is the pane where we submit the new offer. You'll see it has some additional fields, a little bit more involved than the easy button approach. So we'll just I'll take you through these one at a time. But first I want to point out a couple of things up top here. You'll notice that prior, you may not have noticed, I didn't point it out, but I had 0.01 Veritaseum loaded into the platform, and that when I accepted this offer, it used up my VeRI. So I've also got you'll see that it deducted 1 Ethereum out of here, and now I've got 8.5. So what we're going to have to do to get more VeRI, we basically put in an offer. And so to do that, it's similar to the other one. You'll see that the limits here have increased. Now, since we are working as a renter and we're trying to get VeRI tokens, we don't have any. This pane now is working in a currency of ETH, whereas before we were working in Veritaseum as the token fee. So in order to get VeRI, what we want to do, again, this is just to refresh your memory, we're on this half of the equation. We've got Ethereum, but we need VeRI. So we need somebody on the other half of the equation here. And so let's go ahead and say this exposure, I want to open it again for 1 Ethereum. And what kind of price do I want? I'll just go ahead and use that 30% again. That way I'm pretty sure no one will take it. If they do, great. I'll make a boatload on it. I'm going to set this again for 30 days. And then the bottom area here is optional. This is an expiration for this particular order. If I don't set an expiration, it'll look like this over here. There's no expiration in each of these rows for each of these offers. I'm going to go ahead and set an expiration. I want it in terms of days. Let me go ahead and put in, looks like it wants some, let's see, let's put in, let's try to get this baby out to the, oops, there we go, 3 days till the end of the month. I'm going to have this expire on January 31st. I'm going to go ahead and submit. Similar confirmation screen. Again, back to the same process where we've got to submit the MetaMask confirmation. We see the offer sitting over here waiting. If I go ahead and submit that, you'll see the notification over here where it's being added. Again, the transaction created. You can go look at it on Etherscan for the blockchain information. And here we go. The offer is as before. Right now, it's the VeADIR is doing the collection and whatnot, setting this particular offer up. So if we just go back to the summary screen over here, I just want to take a quick peek, and yeah, no updates on the latest trades. So there is definitely a delay going on with the latest trades. Back to the rent screen, we see now that this offer just moved over into the opened exposures, essentially replacing the one I had there. It's now 30%, gonna expire, or actually, oh no, I'm sorry, I apologize. This is the exposure I just opened. I'm on the, I always got to remember, the default is to open up on this offer vary tokens. I need to get back to the get vary tokens. And so now we'll see down here my offers. It has populated my offers in here. There's my 30% offer. If somebody were to take this, the key point of this, and it's a little non-intuitive until you think about it. I need to get, I'm looking to get Veritaseum tokens so that I can close this exposure. The people that are going to be offering Veritaseum tokens are actually over here on this tab. So this is the offer from when it actually opens it up from the Get Veri Tokens tab. It comes over and it displays on the opposite tab. So we'll see right here my offer has displayed. There's my 30% for 30 days, going to expire in roughly 3 days. And so that's essentially it. That's the other method of opening the exposure. A couple points of note. You'll see up top, the Ethereum has been deducted. It was 8.5, now it's 7.5. Still no Veritaseum within the account. That shows that I was able to open this particular offer and get it out here without having any Veritaseum in there. I do not own any, or I was simulating not owning any. For the next example, I'll show how to load some in there. So it did deduct the 1 Ethereum out of there, and it's actually the smart contract is holding it right here, sort of in an escrow mode, waiting for somebody to come along and actually take that offer. And so when that offer is actually accepted, that's when the Veritaseum would be utilized for the exposure. If the expiration of the offer comes into play in a little less than 3 days, the offer expires. The 1 Ethereum that is locked up within the offer will be freed up and returned back to the account up here. So that's it for the renter scenario. we've demonstrated that you can come in and either take an existing offer or open your own new offer. You do not need any Veritaseum for this particular scenario. All you need is to have the Ethereum loaded up into your account that's associated with MetaMask. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the other half of economic rent. That would be as the rentee. Now, the rentee is basically the opposite of the renter with a few new small differences. In this case, the rentee owns Veri, but no Ethereum. The Veri will be consumed as a fee as part of the exposure. And you'll note a little asterisk on the ETH part here. I've got a smaller notation here. You will need a small amount of Ethereum for gas, just like any normal Ethereum blockchain transaction. So not much. As you can see, one way's been getting them done today and lately, but you do have to have that small amount. So just want to point that out. Again, price is a percent of the exposure. In the last example, we saw that it was 30%. So as the renter, renting if that was my Veri that the renter rented, my profit would be 30% when that particular exposure closes. So that's how that works. Again, being the flip side of the equation, the rentee is dependent on the renter to bring ETH to the equation so that the exposure can be opened, and the profit will be paid back to the rentee in ETH. So let's go take a look and see how that works. So this time I am on the right tab. I'm in the offer Veri tokens, so I've got Veritaseum tokens, but in this case I need Ethereum. And so we see then that, oh, looky there, there's that offer that I put earlier. I'll just go ahead and take that. We'll just take that side of the position here. Oh, look at there. Insufficient balance. What's that all about? So if you'll recall, well, I'm offering Veri tokens, but I don't have any. Look at there. So there are several ways to actually add some Veritaseum to the VeADIR. From the menu over here, you can go down to the bottom, and there's a deposit function. That'll bring this up. You'll see my current deposit has no Veri in it, although I've got 0.34 in my account. There's also another way to do it, is you can actually just click on the Veritaseum quantity up here, and that will say, oh, well, look at there. It's got none in there. So let's go ahead and put 0.01 in there, and you simply click update, and again, MetaMask notification. We'll give that a submit, and within a short time we will see that show up. So back over here again, what else can we take a peek at here? I'm kind of stuck until that transaction finishes and we get our Veri in. While I'm waiting for that, similarly to what we just did as a renter, the rentee can actually add their own offer in here as well. And this offer would, like the other offers, show on the opposite tab over here, Get Veri, because what we're offering up is our Veri for a renter who has Ethereum. So that's how that works, kind of cross back and forth. Same process. You load in how much Veri you want to offer for the deal. That would equate to the same 1:100 ratio. So if you use the maximum beta limit, which is 0.05, that would be a 5 Ethereum deal. So you would plug that in here. In this case, it's telling us insufficient balance. Why is that? It's because of that transaction has not yet completed yet. That we loaded in the 0.01. We're still waiting. I should have probably did a two-way instead of a one. The rest of the data is very similar. You plug in the price or the ROI that you're looking to get for your VeADIR, how long of a duration that you're looking for in the exposure, and then the expiration in terms of hours or days of if the offer is not accepted, how long until it expires. And so we still do not have our VeADIR in there, so I'm going to go ahead and pause, and we'll be back in 1 minute. Okay, well, we're back, and the exposure did go. Took a little bit longer than I thought, but you'll see there it is. We've got the 30-day 30% value of 1. So if we come back to the screen here, let's just see. Again, unfortunately, I won't be able to show you the updates with the latest trade part of the summary screen here, but I can use this one from yesterday to point out a couple of things with the exposures. The bucket first gets created by the VeADIR. You'll see here that this was a 1 Ethereum deal, which, as we know then, was associated with 0.01 VeADIR as the fee to open that particular exposure. And then what the VeADIR did was it went out and it bought tokens to fill that bucket up for 30 days. And then at the end of the 30 days, it'll do what's happening down here. Sell the tokens and destroy the bucket and return the profit. But I want to point out something here. You'll see that this actually kind of makes it easy with 1 Ethereum. It used 0.4 of that Ethereum, or 40% of that 1 Ethereum as the VeADIR allocation, and it used 0.3 each, or 30%, for PPT and PPP. So what we can derive from that information is that the current allocation of the VeADIR is 40% VeADIR, 30% PPT, and 30% PPP. So currently, when a user comes in and opens an exposure in any way, whether it's through economic rent or directly through the VE exposure page, what's going to happen is that the current allocation in play by the VeADIR will be utilized to fill the buckets. And again, 40% VeADIR, 30 each PPT and PPP. Now that ratio isn't static. It will change. We don't know when and how the VeADIR operates behind the scenes. We hope to gain more information about that as we do these beta tests. But we do know that the VeADIR works off of the research that's been fed to it by Reggie's financial analysts. And that research then is utilized by the VeADIR within the current market conditions to figure out what tokens to buy and in what proportion. And then it uses that information to go ahead and allocate out each of the various buckets as they get created. You'll see here that these are the tokens within the current portfolio, or the portfolio content as it's noted. It does show Ethereum in here. We've got 4 of them in. Actually, my supposition is what's happening with that is currently it's using this as just gas for the VeADIR, although I could be wrong. We have seen previously where Ethereum was actually part of the portfolio, so it's possible that Ethereum right now isn't a buy for the VeADIR, or other things going on behind the scenes that I just don't know about. So that's really it then from the 3 scenarios with opening and exposure. We first looked at the easy button approach, just going into VE exposure directly for someone who has both Veri and Ethereum. This is actually the fastest way to gain an exposure because you're not dependent on another party to open the exposure. You open both sides of it directly. You've got the Veritaseum and the Ethereum, so you just put in your parameters and boom, you're off and running. The other 2 scenarios we went through, first the renter with Ethereum only, the renter and the rentee with Veri only, except for gas, can both open an exposure 2 different ways. They can go out and peruse the list of offers that are existing and accept one of the offers that works for that particular user, or they can put in their own offer and wait for somebody to accept that. So we will see what sort of price in terms of ROI percent the market will bear there, but I'm sure that will work itself out over time. So again, there's the 3 scenarios: economic rent and VE exposure directly. Thanks again. One more time, a quick apology for the live stream earlier. We'll get the technical difficulties resolved and get back on point for the next live stream. And thanks for joining. We will talk to you all later. Bye-bye.